The Story of Civilization, Volume 4, The Age of Faith, Part 3, by Will Durant. Continued, Cassette 11, Side 1. To Peter Damien, poetry was an incident. To Hildebert of Lavardin, from 1055 to 1133, Archbishop of Tours, it was a passion that fought his faith for his soul. Probably from the Béranger of Tours, who had studied under Fulbert at Chartres, he imbibed a love for the Latin classics. After many tribulations, he journeyed to Rome, not sure which he sought more, papal benediction or a sight of the scenes endeared to him by his reading. He was touched by the grandeur and decay of the old capital, and expressed his feelings in classic elegiac form. "Equal to you, O Rome, there is nothing, even when you are almost a ruin. How great you were when whole, broken you teach us. Long time has destroyed your pride, and the citadels of Caesar sink in the marshes with the temples of the gods. That work, that mighty work, lies low, which the dire barbarian trembled to see standing and mourns to see fallen. But no lapse of years, no fire, no sword, can all destroy this glory." Here for a moment a medieval poet uses the Latin language as nobly as Virgil himself. But once a Christian, always a Christian. Hildebert found more comfort in Jesus and Mary than in Jupiter and Minerva, and in a later poem he impeccably dismissed the ancient shrines. Rome speaks, "Sweeter to me this defeat than those victories. Greater am I poor than when rich, greater prone than standing. More than the eagles has the standard of the cross given me, more Peter than Caesar, more a weaponless crowd than commanders girt with arms. Standing I mastered nations, ruined I strike the depths of the earth. Standing I ruled bodies, broken and prostrate I rule souls. Then I commanded a miserable populace, now the princes of darkness. Then cities were my realm, now the sky." Not since Fortunatus had any Latin penned such poetry. 2. Wine, Women, and Song. Our knowledge of the pagan or skeptical aspects of medieval life is naturally fragmentary. The past has not transmitted itself to us impartially, except in our blood. We must all the more admire the liberality of spirit, or the fellowship of enjoyment, that led the monastery of Benediktbeuern in Upper Bavaria to preserve the manuscript which reached print in 1847 as Carmina Burana, the Beuern poems, and is now our main source for the poetry of the wandering scholars. These were not tramps. Some were footloose monks straying from their monasteries, some were clerics out of a job. Most were students en route, often by foot, between home and university, or from one university to another. Many students stopped at taverns on the way. Some sampled wines and women and learned unscheduled lore. Some composed songs, sang them, sold them. Some abandoned hope of an ecclesiastical career and lived from pen to mouth by dedicating their poetic powers to bishops or lords. They labored chiefly in France and Western Germany, but as they wrote in Latin, their poems achieved an international currency. They pretended to have an organization, the Ordo Vagorum, or Guild of Wanderers, and they invented as its founder and patron saint a mythical Rabelaisian personage whom they called Golius. As early as the 10th century, Archbishop Walter of Sens fulminated against the scandalous family of Golius, and as late as 1227 a church council condemned the Goliardi for singing parodies on the most sacred songs of the liturgy. "They go about in public naked," said the Council of Salzburg in 1281. "They lie in bake-ovens, frequent taverns, games, harlots, earn their bread by their vices, and cling with obstinacy to their sect." We know only a few of these Goliardic poets individually. One was Hugh or Hugo Primus, a canon at Orleans about 1140. "A vile fellow, deformed of visage," says a rival scribe, "but famed through many provinces for his ready wit and verse. Dying of unbought poetry and flinging angry satires at the ecclesiastical rich. A man of great erudition and little shame, writing coarse indecencies in hexameters almost as chaste as Hildebert's." Still more renowned was one whose name is lost, but whom his admirers called Archipoeta, the arch-poet, circa 1161, a German knight who preferred wine and ink to sword and blood, and lived fitfully on the occasional charity of Reynald von Dassel, Archbishop-elect of Cologne and ambassador of Barbarossa at Pavia. Reynald tried to reform him, but the poet begged off with one of the most famous of medieval poems, the Confession of Goliath, whose final stanza became a favorite drinking song in German universities. Seething over inwardly with fierce indignation, in my bitterness of soul hear my declaration. I am of one element, levity my matter, like enough a withered leaf for the winds to scatter. Never yet could I endure soberness and sadness. Jests I love, and sweeter than honey find I gladness. Whatsoever Venus bids is a joy excelling. Never in an evil heart did she make her dwelling. Down the broad way do I go, young and unregretting. Wrap me in my vices up, virtue all forgetting. Greedier for all delight than heaven to enter in. Since the soul in me is dead, better save the skin. Pardon, pray you, good my lord, master of discretion, but this death I die is sweet, most delicious poison. Wounded to the quick am I by a young girl's beauty. She's beyond my touching? Well, can't the mind do duty? Sit you down amid the fire. Will the fire not burn you? Come to Pavia, will you just as chaste return you? Pavia, where beauty draws youth with fingertips, youth entangled in her eyes, ravished with her lips. Let you bring Hippolytus in Pavia dine him. Nevermore Hippolytus will the morning find him. In Pavia not a road but leads to venery, nor among its crowding towers one to chastity. For on this my heart is set. When the hour is nigh me, let me in the tavern die, with a tankard by me. While the angels, looking down, joyously sing o'er me, Deus sit propitius, huic potatori. The Carmina Burana range over all the themes of youth. Spring, love, boasts of seductions achieved, delicate obscenities, tender lyrics of love unreturned, a student's song counseling a moratorium on studies and a holiday with love, omitamus studia dulce est discepere. In one song, a girl interrupts a scholar's labor with, Quid tu facis, domine? Veni mecum ludere. What are you doing, master? Come and play with me. Another sings the faithlessness of woman, another the grief of the betrayed and forsaken lass whose horizontal growth brings down parental blows. Many chant the joys of drinking or gambling. Some attack the wealth of the church, the gospel according to the silver mark. Some parody the noblest hymns, like Thomas's Lauda Sion. One is a Whitmanesque song of the open road. Many are doggerel, some are masterpieces of lyric craftsmanship. Here is a lover's idyll of ideal death. When she recklessly gave herself wholly unto love and me, beauty in heavens afar laughed from her joyous star. Too great desire hath overwhelmed me, my heart's not great enough, for this huge joy that overmastered me. What time my love made in her arms another man of me, and all the gathered honey of her lips drained in one yielded kiss. Again I dream the freedom given of her soft breast, and so am come another god to heaven among the rest. Yea, and serene would govern gods and men if I find again my hand upon her breast. Most of the love poetry in the Carmina is frankly sensual. There are moments of tenderness and grace, but they are brief preludes. We might have guessed that by the side of the hymns of the church there would sooner or later be hymns to Venus. Woman, the devoted supporter of religion, is the chief rival of the gods. The church listened patiently enough to these chants of love and wine, but in 1281 a council decreed that any cleric, therefore any student, who composed or sang licentious or impious songs should lose his clerical rank and privileges. Such wandering students as thereafter remained loyal to Golius sank to the level of jongleur and fell out of literature into ribald doggerel. By 1250 the day of the Goliards was over, but as they had inherited a pagan current running beneath the Christian centuries, so their mood and poetry secretly survived to enter the Renaissance. Latin poetry itself almost died with the Goliards. The 13th century turned the best minds to philosophy, the classics retreated to a minor place in the university curriculum, and the almost Augustan grace of Hildebert and John of Salisbury had no heirs. When the 13th century ended and Dante chose Italian for his medium, the vernacular languages became literature. Even drama, child and servant of the church, put off its Latin dress and spoke the people's tongues. 3. The rebirth of drama. The classic drama had died before the Middle Ages began, for it had degenerated into mime and farce, and had been replaced by hippodrome spectacles. The plays of Seneca and Roswitha were literary exercises, which apparently never reached the stage. Two lines of active continuity remained, the mimetic rituals of agricultural festivals, and the farces played by wandering minstrels and clowns in castle hall or village square. But in the Middle Ages, as in ancient Greece, the main fountainhead of drama was in religious liturgy. The Mass itself was a dramatic spectacle. The sanctuary was a sacred stage. The celebrants wore symbolic costumes. Priest and acolytes engaged in dialogue, and the antiphonal responses of priest and choir, and of choir to choir, suggested precisely that same evolution of drama from dialogue that had generated the sacred Dionysian play. In the ceremonies of certain holy days, the dramatic element was explicitly developed. At Christmas, in some religious rites of the 11th century, men dressed as shepherds entered the church, were greeted with glad tidings by a choir boy angel, and worshipped a wax or plaster babe in a manger. From an eastern door, 3 kings entered and were guided to the manger by a star pulled along a wire. On the 28th of December, certain churches represented the slaughter of the innocents. Boy choristers marched up nave and aisles, fell as if murdered by Herod, rose and walked up into the sanctuary as a symbol of mounting into heaven. On Good Friday, many churches removed the crucifix from the altar and carried it to a receptacle representing the Holy Sepulchre, from which on Easter morning it was solemnly restored to the altar in token of resurrection. As far back as 380, the story of Christ's Passion had been written as a Euripidean drama by Gregory Nazianzen, Patriarch of Constantinople, and from that time to this the Passion play has kept its hold upon Christian peoples. The first such play recorded as having been performed was presented at Siena about 1200. Probably there had been many such representations long before. As the Church used architecture, sculpture, painting, and music to impress upon the faithful the central scenes and ideas of the Christian epic, so she appealed to the imagination and intensified the piety of the people by developing in increasing splendor and detail the dramatic implications of the greater feasts. The tropes, or amplifying texts added for musical elaboration to the liturgy, were sometimes turned into little plays. So an Easter trope in a 10th century manuscript at St. Gall assigns this dialogue to parts of a choir divided to represent angels and the 3 Marys. Angels, whom seek ye in the tomb, O servants of Christ? Marys, we seek Christ that was crucified, O heavenly host. Angels, he is not here, he is risen, as he foretold. Go and announce that he is risen. United chorus, Alleluia, the Lord has risen. Gradually, from the 12th century onward, the religious spectacles grew too complex for representation within doors. A platform was set up outside the church, and the ludus or play was performed by actors chosen from the people and trained to memorize an extended script. The oldest extant example of this form is a 12th century representation of Adam, written in French with Latin rubrics in red ink as directions to the players. Adam and Eve, dressed in white tunics, are shown playing in an Eden represented by shrubs and flowers in front of the church. Devils appear, in those red tights that have clung to them ever since in the theater. They run through the audience, twisting their bodies and making horrible grimaces. They offer the forbidden fruit to Adam, who refuses it, then to Eve, who takes it, and Eve persuades Adam. So convicted of a desire for knowledge, Adam and Eve are fettered with irons and are dragged off by the devils to hell, a hole in the ground, from which comes an infernal noise of rejoicing. In a second act, Cain prepares to murder Abel. Abel, he announces, you are a dead man. Abel, why am I a dead man? Cain, do you wish to hear why I want to kill you? I will tell you. Because you ingratiate yourself too much with God. Cain flings himself upon Abel and beats him to death. But the author is merciful. Abel, reads the rubric, shall have a saucepan beneath his clothes. Such biblical ludi were later called mysteries, from the Latin ministerium, in the sense of an action. This was also the meaning of drama. When the story was post-biblical, it was called a miraculum, or miracle play, and usually turned on some marvelous deed of the Virgin or the saints. Hilarius, a pupil of Abélard, composed several such short plays, circa 1125, in a mixture of Latin and French. By the middle of the 13th century, the vernacular languages were the regular medium of such miracles. Humor, increasingly broad, played a rising role in them, and their subjects became more and more secular. Meanwhile, the farce had made its own development toward drama. The evolution is exemplified in 2 short plays that have come down to us from the pen of an Arras hunchback, Adam de la Halle, circa 1260. One of them, Le Jeu Adam, the play of Adam, is about the author himself. He had planned to be a priest, but fell in love with sweet Marie. It was a beautiful and clear summer day, mild and green, with delightful song of birds. In the high woods near the brook, I caught sight of her who is now my wife and who now seems pale and yellow to me. My hunger for her is satisfied. He tells her so with peasant directness and plans to go to Paris and the university. Into this marital scene, with more rhyme than reason, the author introduces a physician, a madman, a monk begging alms and promising miracles, and a troupe of fairies singing songs, like a ballet projected by main force into a modern opera. Adam offends one of the fairies, who lays upon him the curse of never leaving his wife. From such nonsense there is a line of continuous development to Bernard Shaw. As secularization proceeded, the performances moved from the church grounds to the marketplace or some other square in the town. There were no theaters. For the few performances to be given, usually on some summer festival, a temporary stage was erected with benches for the people and gaily decorated booths for nobilities. Surrounding houses might be used as background and properties. In religious plays, the actors were young clerics. In secular plays, they were town mummers or wandering jongleurs. Women rarely took part. As the plays strayed farther from the church in scene and theme, they tended toward buffoonery and obscenity. And the church, which had given birth to the serious drama, found herself forced to condemn the village ludi as immoral. So Bishop Grosseteste of Lincoln classed the plays, even the miracles, along with drinking bouts and the Feast of Fools, as performances that no Christian should attend. And by such edicts as his of 1236 to 1244, the actors who took part were automatically excommunicated. St. Thomas was more lenient and ruled that the profession of histrio had been ordained for the solace of humanity, and that an actor who practiced it becomingly might, by God's mercy, escape hell. 4. Epics and Sagas. The secularization of literature went hand in hand with the rise of the national languages. By and large, by the 12th century, only clerics could understand Latin, and writers who wished to reach a lay audience were compelled to use the vernacular tongues. As social order grew, the reading audience widened, and national literatures rose to meet its demand. French literature began in the 11th century, German in the 12th, English, Spanish, and Italian in the 13th. The natural early form of these indigenous literatures was the popular song. The song was drawn out into the ballad, and the ballad, by proliferation or agglutination, swelled into such minor epics as Beowulf, the Chanson de Roland, the Nibelungenlied, and the Cid. The chanson was probably put together about 1130 from ballads of the 9th or 10th century. In 4,000 simple, flowing iambic lines, it tells the story of Roland's death at Roncesvalles. Charlemagne, having conquered Moorish Spain, turns back with his army toward France. The traitorous Ganelon reveals their route to the enemy, and Roland volunteers to lead the dangerous rearguard. In a narrow winding gorge of the Pyrenees, a horde of Basques pours down from the cliffs upon Roland's little force. His friend Olivier begs him to sound his great horn as a call to Charlemagne for aid, but Roland proudly refuses to ask for help. He and Olivier and Archbishop Turpin lead their troops in a desperate resistance, and they fight till nearly all are dead. Olivier, blinded by blood flowing from mortal wounds in his head, mistakes Roland for an enemy and strikes him. Roland's helmet is split from crown to nose-piece, but saves him. At this blow, Roland looks at him, asks him gently and softly, "Sir comrade, do you this in earnest? I am that Roland who loves you so well. In no wise have you sent me defiance." Says Olivier, "Now I hear you speak, I do not see you. God see and save you. Struck you have I, forgive it to me." Roland replies, "I have no injury. I forgive you here and before God." At this word one to the other bows, and with such love they part. Roland at last blows his oliphant, blows till the blood bursts from his temples. Charlemagne hears and turns back to the rescue, his white beard flying in the wind. But the way is long. High are the mountains, vast and dark, deep are the valleys, swift the streams. Meanwhile Roland mourns over the corpse of Olivier and says to it, "Sir comrade, we have been together through many days and many years. You never did me evil, nor I to you. Life is all pain if you are dead." The archbishop, also dying, begs Roland to save himself by flight. Roland refuses and continues to fight till the attackers flee, but he too is mortally wounded. With his last strength he breaks his jeweled sword, Durant, against a stone, lest it fall into heathen hands. Now Count Roland lay under a pine tree, his face turned toward Spain. Many memories came upon him then. He thought of the lands he had conquered, of sweet France, and his family, and Charles, who had brought him up, and he wept. He held up his glove to God as a sign of loyal vassalage. Charles, arriving, finds him dead. No translation can catch the simple but knightly dignity of the original, and none but one reared to love France and honor her can feel to the full the power and sentiment of this, the national epic that every French child learns, almost with its prayers. About 1160, an unknown poet, romantically idealizing the character and exploits of Ruy or Rodrigo Diaz, who died in 1099, gave a national epic to Spain in the Poema del Cid. Here, too, the theme is the struggle of Christian knights against the Spanish Moors, the exaltation of feudal courage, honor, and magnanimity, the glory of war rather than the servitude of love. So Rodrigo, banished by an ungrateful king, leaves his wife and children in a nunnery and vows never to live with them again till he has won 5 battles. He goes to fight the Moors, and the first half of the poem resounds with Homeric victories. Between the battles, the Cid robs Jews, scatters alms among the poor, feeds a leper, eats from the same dish with him, sleeps in the same bed, and discovers him to be Lazarus, whom Christ raised from the dead. This, of course, is not the Cid of history, but it does no greater injury to fact than the chanson with its idealization of Charlemagne. The Cid became a heady stimulant to Spanish thought and pride. Hundreds of ballads were composed about its hero, and 100 histories, more or less historical. There are few things in the world so unpopular as truth, and the backbone of men and states is a concatenation of romance. No one has yet explained why little Iceland, harassed by the elements and isolated by the sea, should have produced in this period a literature of scope and brilliance quite out of proportion to its place and size. 2 circumstances helped: a rich store of orally transmitted historical traditions, dear to any segregated group, and a habit of reading, or being read to, which was favored by long winter nights. Already in the 12th century there were many private libraries in the island, in addition to those in the monasteries. When writing became a familiar accomplishment, laymen as well as priests put this racial lore, once the property of skalds, into literary form. By a rare anomaly, the leading writer of 13th century Iceland was also its richest man, and twice the President of the Republic, the Speaker of the Law. Snorri Sturluson, 1178 to 1241, loved life more than letters. He traveled widely, engaged vigorously in politics and feuds, and was murdered by his son-in-law at 62. His Heimskringla, the Round World, told Norse history and legend with a spare and brief simplicity natural to a man of action. His Edda Snorra Sturlusonar, or Prose Edda, gave a summary of biblical history, a synopsis of Norse mythology, an essay on poetic meters, a treatise on the art of poetry, and a unique explanation of the art's urological origin. 2 warring groups of gods made peace by spitting into a jar. From this spittle was formed a demigod, Kvasir, who taught men wisdom like Prometheus. Kvasir was slain by dwarfs who mixed his blood with wine and produced a nectar that conferred the gift of song on all who drank of it. The great god Odin found his way to where the dwarfs had stored this poetic wine, drank it all up and flew to heaven. But some of the pent-up liquid escaped from him by a means rarely used in public fountains. This divine stream fell in an inspiring spray upon the earth, and those who were bedewed by it imbibed the gift of poesy. It was a learned man's nonsense, quite as rational as history. The literature of Iceland in this period is astonishingly rich and still alive with interest, vivacity, humor, and a poetic charm that pervades its prose. Hundreds of sagas were written, some brief, some as long as a novel, some historical, most of them mingling history and myth. In general, they were civilized memories of a barbarous age, compact of honor and violence, complicated with litigation and mitigated with love. The Ynglinga sagas of Snorri repeatedly tell of Norse knights who burned one another, or themselves, in their halls or cups. The most fertile of these legends was the Volsunga saga. Its stories had an early form in the Elder or Poetic Edda. They had their latest form in Wagner's Ring of the Nibelungs. A Volsung was any descendant of Wales, a Norse king who was great-grandson of Odin and grandfather to Sigurd, or Siegfried. In the Nibelungenlied, the Nibelungs are Burgundian kings. In the Volsunga saga, they are a race of dwarfs guarding in the Rhine a gold treasure and ring which are infinitely precious, but bring a curse and misfortune to all who possess them. Sigurd slays Fafnir, the dragon guardian of the hoard, and captures it. On his wanderings he comes to a fire-encircled hill, on which the Valkyrie, an Odin-descended demigoddess, Brunhild, sleeps. This is one form of the Sleeping Beauty tale. Sigurd is ravished by her beauty, and she is ravished. They plight their troth, and then, as is the way of men in many medieval romances, he leaves her and resumes his travels. At the court of Giuki, a Rhine king, he finds the princess Gudrun. Her mother gives him an enchanted drink which enables him to forget Brunhild and marry Gudrun. Gunnar, son of Giuki, marries Brunhild and brings her to the court. Resenting Sigurd's amnesia, she has him killed. Then in remorse she mounts his funeral pyre, slays herself with his sword, and is consumed with him. The most modern in form of these Icelandic sagas is the story of Burnt Njal, circa 1220. The characters are sharply defined by their deeds and words rather than by description. The tale is well constructed and moves with inherent fatality through stirring events to the central catastrophe, the burning of Njal's house, with himself and his wife, Bergthora, and his sons, by an armed band of enemies led by one Flosi, and bent on blood vengeance against Njal's sons. Then Flosi called out to Njal and said, "I will offer thee, Master Njal, leave to go out, for it is unworthy that thou shouldst burn indoors." "I will not go out," said Njal, "for I am an old man, and little fitted to avenge my sons, but I will not live in shame." Then Flosi said to Bergthora, "Come thou out, housewife, for I will for no sake burn thee indoors." "I was given away to Njal young," said Bergthora, "and I have promised him this, that we should both share the same fate." After that they both went back into the house. "What counsel shall we now take?" said Bergthora. "We will go to our bed," said Njal, "and lay us down. I have long been eager for rest." Then she said to the boy Tord, Kari's son, "Thee will I take out, and thou shalt not burn in here." "Thou hast promised me this, grandmother," said the boy, "that we should never part so long as I wish to be with thee. But methinks it is much better to die with thee and Njal than to live after you." Then she bore the boy to her bed and put him between herself and Njal. Then they signed themselves and the boy with the cross, and gave over their souls into God's hand, and that was the last word men heard them utter. The age of migrations, 300 to 600, had deposited in the confused memory of peoples and minstrels 1,000 stories of social chaos, barbaric courage, and murderous love. Some of these tales were carried to Norway and Iceland, and produced the Volsana saga. Many, with kindred names and themes, lived and multiplied in Germany in the form of legends, ballads, and sagas. At an unknown time in the 12th century, an unknown German, uniting and transforming such materials, composed the Nibelungenlied, or Song of the Nibelungs. Its form is a concatenation of rhyming couplets in Middle High German. Its narrative is a brew of primitive passions and pagan moods. Sometime in the 4th century, King Gunther and his 2 brothers ruled Burgundy from their castle at Worms on the Rhine, and with them dwelt their young sister Kriemhild. In no land was any fairer. In those days King Siegmund governed the lowlands, and enfeoffed his son Siegfried, or Sigurd, with a rich estate near Xanten, also on the Rhine. Hearing of Kriemhild's loveliness, Siegfried invited himself to Gunther's court, made himself welcome there, lived there for a year, but never saw Kriemhild, though she, looking from her high window upon the youths tilting in the courtyard, loved him from the first. Siegfried surpassed all in jousts, and fought bravely for the Burgundians in their wars. When Gunther celebrated a victorious peace, he bade the ladies join the feast. Many a noble maiden adorned herself with care, and the youths longed exceedingly to find favor in their eyes, and had not taken a rich king's land in lieu thereof. And lo, Kriemhild appeared, like the dawn from out the dark clouds, and he that had borne her so long in his heart was no more aweary. And Siegfried joyed and sorrowed, for he said in his heart, "How should I woo such as thee? Surely it was a vain dream. Yet I were liefer dead than a stranger to thee." Her colour was kindled when she saw before her the high-minded man, and she said, "Welcome, Sir Siegfried, noble knight and good." His courage rose at her words, and graceful as beseemed a knight, he bowed himself before her and thanked her. And love that is mighty constrained them, and they yearned with their eyes in secret. Gunther, unmarried, hears of the Icelandic queen Brunhild, but she, he is informed, can be won only by one who excels her in 3 trials of strength. And if he fails in any, he forfeits his head. Siegfried agrees to help Gunther win Brunhild, if the king will give him Kriemhild to wife. They cross the sea with the speed and ease of romance. Siegfried, made invisible by a magic cape, helps Gunther meet the tests, and Gunther brings the reluctant Brunhild home as his bride. 86 damsels help Kriemhild prepare rich garments for her. In a double marriage of great pomp, Gunther weds Brunhild, and Siegfried is joined to Kriemhild. But Brunhild, seeing Siegfried, feels that he, not Gunther, was meant to be her mate. When Gunther goes into her on their marriage night, she repulses him, ties him in a knot, and hangs him up on the wall. Gunther, released, begs Siegfried's aid. The hero, on the next night, disguises himself as Gunther and lies beside Brunhild, while Gunther, hidden in the darkened room, hears all and sees nothing. Brunhild throws Siegfried out of bed and engages him in a bone-crunching, head-cracking combat quite without rules. "Alas," he says to himself amid the fight, "if I lose my life by the hand of a woman, all wives evermore will make light of their husbands." Brunhild is finally overcome and promises to be a wife. Siegfried retires unseen, bearing away her girdle and her ring, and Gunther takes his place beside the exhausted queen. Siegfried makes a present of the girdle and ring to Kriemhild. He brings her to his father, who crowns him king of the lowlands. Using his Nibelungen wealth, Siegfried clothes his wife and her maidens more richly than ever women were robed before. Some time later, Kriemhild visits Brunhild at Worms. Brunhild, jealous of Kriemhild's finery, reminds her that Siegfried is Gunther's vassal. Kriemhild retorts by showing her the girdle and ring as proof that Siegfried, not Gunther, had overcome her. Hagen, gloomy half-brother to Gunther, rouses him against Siegfried. They invite him to a hunt, and as he stoops over a brook to drink, Hagen pierces him with a spear. Kriemhild, seeing her hero dead, lay senseless in a swoon all that day and night. She inherits the Nibelung treasure as Siegfried's widow, but Hagen persuades Gunther to take it from her. Gunther, his brothers, and Hagen bury it in the Rhine and take an oath never to reveal its hiding place. For 13 years, Kriemhild broods over vengeance upon Hagen and her brothers, but finds no opportunity. Then she accepts the marriage proposal of the widowed Etzel, or Attila, king of the Huns, and goes to Vienna to live as his queen. So famed was Etzel's rule that the boldest knights, Christian or heathen, drew ceaselessly to his court. One saw there what one never sees now, Christian and heathen together. How so diverse their beliefs, the king gave with such free hand that all had plenty. There Kriemhild ruled virtuously for 13 years, seeming to forego vengeance. Indeed, she asks Etzel to invite her brothers and Hagen to a feast. They accept despite Hagen's warning, but come with an armed retinue of yeomen and knights. While the royal brothers, Hagen, and the knights enjoy the hospitality of the Hun court in Etzel's hall, the yeomen outside are slain at Kriemhild's command. Hagen is told of it and springs to arms. A terrible battle ensues in the hall between the Burgundians and the Huns, perhaps recalling their actual war of 437. With his first blow, Hagen strikes off the head of Ortlieb, the 5-year-old son of Kriemhild and Etzel, and he flings the head into Kriemhild's lap. When nearly all the Burgundians are dead, Gernot, brother of Kriemhild and Gunther, asks Etzel to let the surviving visitors escape from the hall. The Hun knights wish it, Kriemhild forbids it. The slaughter goes on. Her youngest brother, Giselher, who was an innocent lad of 5 when Siegfried fell, appeals to her. "Fairest sister, how have I deserved death from the Huns? I was ever true to thee, nor did thee any hurt. I rode hither, dearest sister, for that I trusted to thy love. Needs must thou show mercy." She agrees to let them escape if they will deliver Hagen to her. "God in heaven forbid," cries Gernot. "Liefer would we all die than give one man for our ransom." Kriemhild draws the Huns from the building, locks the Burgundians in it, and has it set on fire. Maddened with heat and thirst, the Burgundians cry out in agony. Hagen bids them assuage their thirst with the blood of the slain. They do. Some emerge from the flaming and fallen timbers. The battle continues in the courtyard until of the Burgundians only Gunther and Hagen remain alive. Dietrich the Goth fights and overcomes Hagen and brings him bound to Kriemhild. She asks Hagen where he has concealed the Nibelung treasure. He refuses to tell her as long as Gunther is alive. Gunther, also captive, is slain at his sister's bidding, and his head is brought to Hagen. But Hagen defies her. "Now none knows where the hoard is, save God and I alone. That to thee, devil-woman, shall never more be known." She seizes his sword and strikes him dead. Then Hildebrand the Goth, one of her warriors, surfeited with her bloodlust, slays Kriemhild. It is a terrible tale, as red with gore as any in literature or beneath. We do some injustice to it by taking its direst moments from their context of feasting, jousting, hunting, and womanly affairs. But this is the central and bitter theme, a gentle maiden changed by the experience of evil into a ferocious murderess. Strangely little of Christianity is left in the story. It is rather a Greek tragedy of Nemesis, without the Greek reluctance to let violence come upon the stage. In this stream of crime, almost all feudal virtues are submerged, even the honor of host to invited guest. Nothing could surpass the barbarism of such a tale until our time. 5. The Troubadours. At the end of the 11th century, when we should have expected all European letters to be colored by the religious enthusiasm of the Crusades, there developed in southern France a school of lyric poetry, aristocratic, pagan, anti-clerical, bearing the marks of Arab influence and signalizing the triumph of woman over the chastisement laid upon her by the theory of the fall. This style of verse moved from Toulouse to Paris to London with Eleanor of Aquitaine, captured the lion heart of her son Richard I, created the Minnesingers of Germany, and molded the Italian dolce stil nuovo that led to Dante. At the origin of the style stands Eleanor's grandfather, William X, Count of Poitou and Duke of Aquitaine. This reckless blade found himself at 11, in 1087, the practically independent ruler of southwestern France. He joined the First Crusade and sang its victory, but like so many nobles in his heresy-infected lands, he had scant respect for the Church and made gay mockery of her priests. An old Provençal biography describes him as one of the most courteous men in the world and a great deceiver of ladies, and he was a brave knight and had much to do with love affairs, and he knew well how to sing and make verses, and for a long time he roamed all through the land to deceive the ladies. Though married, he carried off the beautiful Viscountess of Châtellerault and lived with her in open scandal. When the bold, bald Bishop of Angoulême bade him end his wicked ways, he replied, "I will repudiate the Viscountess as soon as your hair requires a comb." Excommunicated, he one day met the Bishop of Poitiers. "Absolve me," he said, "or I will kill you." "Strike," answered the bishop, offering his neck. "No," said William, "I do not love you well enough to send you to paradise." The Duke set a style of writing amorous poetry to noble dames. He suited the action to the word, led a short life and a merry one, and died at 56 in 1137. He left to Eleanor his immense domain, and his taste for poetry and love. She gathered poets about her at Toulouse, and willingly they sang for her and her court the beauty of women and the fever engendered by their charms. Bernard de Ventadour, whose poems seemed to Petrarch only slightly inferior to his own, began by praising the loveliness of the Viscountess of Ventadour. She took him so seriously that her husband had to shut her up in his castle tower. Bernard, encouraged, turned to chant the splendor of Eleanor herself, and followed her to Rouen. When she preferred the love of two kings, he emptied out his soul in a famous dirge. A generation later, the troubadour Bertrand de Born became the bosom friend of Richard I, and his successful rival for the love of the most beautiful woman of her time, Dame Mentz of Martignac. Another troubadour, Pierre Vidal, from 1167 to 1215, accompanied Richard on crusade, returned intact, lived and rhymed in amours and poverty, and received at last an estate from Count Raymond VI of Toulouse. We know the names of 446 other troubadours, but from these 4 we may judge their loose, melodious tribe. Some were musical vagabonds, most were minor nobles with a flair for song. 4 were kings, Richard I, Frederick II, Alfonso IV, and Pedro III of Aragon. For a century, from 1150 to 1250, they dominated the literature of southern France, and molded the manners of an aristocracy emerging from rustic brutality into a chivalry that almost redeemed war with courtesy and adultery with grace. The language of the troubadours was the Languedoc or Roman of southern France and northeastern Spain. Their name is a puzzle. Troubadour is probably from the Roman word trobar, to find or invent, as obviously the Italian trovatore is from trovare. But some would take it from the Arabic taraba, to sing. They called their art gay saber, or gaia scientia, gay wisdom, but they took it seriously enough to undergo a long period of training in poetry, music, and the forms of speech and gallantry. They dressed like the nobility, flaunted a mantle trimmed with gold embroidery and costly furs, rode often in knightly armor, entered the lists at tournaments, and fought with lance as well as pen for the ladies to whom they had pledged their lines, if not their lives. They wrote only for the aristocracy. Usually they composed music for their own lyrics, and hired minstrels to sing them at banquets or tournaments, but often they themselves would strum the lute and ring a passion through a song. Probably the passion was a literary form. The burning longing, the celestial fulfillments, the tragic despair of the troubadours were poetic license and machinery. Apparently the husbands took these ardors so and had less sense of property than most males. Since marriage among the aristocracy was normally an incident in a transfer of property, romance had to come after marriage, as in French fiction. The amours of medieval literature are, with a few exceptions, tales of illicit love, from Francesca and Beatrice in the south to Isolde and Guinevere in the north. The general inaccessibility of the married lady generated the poetry of the troubadours. It is hard to romanticize desire fulfilled, and where there are no impediments, there is no poetry. We hear of a few troubadours who received the ultimate favor from the ladies whom they had chosen for their lays, but this was a breach of literary etiquette. Usually the poet had to sate his thirst with a kiss or a touch of the hand. Such restraint made for refinement, and in the 13th century the poetry of the troubadours, perhaps influenced by the worship of Mary, graduated from sensualism to an almost spiritual delicacy. But they were seldom pious. Their resentment of chastity set them at odds with the Church. Several of them lampooned prelates, ridiculed hell, defended the Albigensian heretics, and celebrated the victorious crusade of the impious Frederick, where the saintly Louis had failed. Guillaume Adhémar approved one crusade, but only because it removed a husband from his path. Raymond Jordan preferred a night with his beloved to any promised transmundane paradise. Forms of composition seemed more important to the troubadours than commandments of morality. The canzo was a song of love, the plainte was a dirge for a friend or lover lost to death, the tanson was a rhymed debate on a question of love, morality, or chivalry. The servante was a song of war, feud, or political attack. The sistine was a complicated rhyme sequence of 6 stanzas, each of 6 lines, invented by Arnaud Daniel and much admired by Dante. The pastourelle was a dialogue between a troubadour and a shepherdess. The aubade or alba, a song of the dawn, usually warned lovers that the day would soon reveal them. The serena or serenade was an evening song. The ballada was a narrative in verse. Here is an anonymous aubade, partly spoken by a 12th century Juliet. In a garden where the white thorn spreads her leaves, my lady hath her love lain close beside her, till the warden cries the dawn. Ah, dawn that grieves! Ah, God, that dawn should come so soon. Please, God, that night, dear night, should never cease, nor that my love should parted be from me. Nor watch cry dawn, ah, dawn that slayeth peace, ah, God, that dawn should come so soon. Fair friend and sweet, thy lips, our lips again, lo, in the meadow where the birds give song. Ours be the love, and jealousy's the pain. Ah, God, that dawn should come so soon. Of that sweet wind comes from far away have I drunk deep of my beloved's breath, yea, of my love's that is so dear and gay. Ah, God, that dawn should come so soon. Fair is this damsel and right courteous, and many watch her beauty's gracious way. Her heart toward love is nowise traitorous. Ah, God, that dawn should come so soon. The troubadour movement in France came to an end amid the 13th century, partly through the increasing artificiality of its forms and sentiments, partly through the ruin of South France by the Albigensian Crusades. For in that troubled time many castles fell that had harbored troubadours, and when Toulouse itself suffered a double siege, the knightly order in Aquitaine collapsed. Some singers fled to Spain, some to Italy. There, in the second half of the 13th century, the art of the love lyric was reborn, and Dante and Petrarch were scions of the troubadours. The gay science of their gallantry helped to mold the code of chivalry and to turn the barbarians of northern Europe into gentlemen. Literature ever since has felt the influence of those subtle songs, and perhaps love now bears a finer fragrance from the incense of their praise. 6. The Minnesingers. The troubadour movement spread from France to southern Germany and flourished there in the golden age of the Hohenstaufen emperors. This book is continued at this point on the other side of this cassette. Please reverse or turn the cassette over now.